Hello, personal productivity enthusiasts and community. Welcome to Anything But Idle, the Productivity News Podcast. Today's show is brought to you by Co-working Space by Personal Productivity Club. And I'm Ray Sidney Smith.
And I'm Augusto Pinot.
And we're your hosts for Anything But Idle. This is episode 69, Google Drive for Desktop Gets an Upgrade, and the Power of Simplicity. We're recording this on July 12th, 2021. Each week, we review and discuss the productivity and technology news headlines of the week. And so this week, we're actually going to be talking first about the power of simplicity before we get into our stories of the week, which are kind of two parts. In the first part, we talk about, technology articles and the various productivity and technology kind of headlines. And then in the second half, we talk about the various productivity articles that we found throughout the week. This week, we also have a segment from Penny Zenker for the Priority Report, talking about priority and decision-making research. We'll do our new tools of the week, and then we will close out with our featured story this week, which is all about Google Drive's upgrades. And so with that, let's start off with our discussion on the power of simplicity. And the way in which I think about it is that simplicity is one of those things that looks on its surface easy, but things that are simple and complex are very different than that which is simple or easy and easy to difficult in essence, right? So we tend to kind of fluctuate between this concept of that simple is, say, a few steps, and then something that has more steps becomes more complex. That could actually be quite easy, even though it may be difficult to do something very simple. Like if you have a very difficult discussion you have to have with a spouse or with a family member, that could be very difficult from the perspective of it being emotionally charged. So simplicity is not necessarily easy, and so that's where I think about things when it comes to simplicity. And I really want to talk. I usually want to talk about simplicity from the perspective of how do we make things better by making them simpler. Augusto, how do you think about simplicity in your own productivity world?
I did not start my journey into productivity with simplicity in mind. Okay, that's not how productivity came to me. Simplicity came for me much later, but it's not about having less steps, but it's about understanding and having everything that I need, but not anything that is nice too. One of the issues initially for me in simplicity in my life in general was I got a lot of things that, yeah, it solved problems, it did things, but that tend to be the maintenance and the upkeep of those things make my life more complicated than the benefit I was getting from that such tool or equipment. So one of the things I have learned now is to look at both parts. Okay, what is the benefit I may get versus what is going to be the on-keep. So, for example, when people ask me, well, you are iPad only, but if you go to other devices, you can get so much more power. It's true, okay? But also then give me the risk of wanting to play with customization, that then it's a big, big rabbit hole for me. So that simplicity that the iPad brings also keep that other side of the maintenance of the on-keep. The iPad is super easy to maintain. I don't need to think. Whatever the iPad's supposed to do, it's going to do it. Every time I play with other platforms, that simplicity sometimes gets thrown out.
Yeah, so the way in which I see simplicity, I kind of touched on it earlier, which was that simplicity for me is kind of the genius or the elegance of something. Simplicity is actually, for me, fairly difficult to achieve because you have to go through all the complexity of any particular situation. And I'm really thinking, in this case, regarding workflows. But I really try to, when I approach a scenario where a workflow has to be designed, I think about how to make it the simplest, which usually means working through all of the potential pitfalls and then solving for those so that when either I or other people are going to go do that thing, it becomes so much easier to do. Simplicity then begets ease of accomplishments because I've thought through all of the pieces to make sure that people can actually do the things that need to be done and potentially automate or optimize the things, optimize away the things that don't need to be done. And that really, for me, is where simplicity really comes from. But simplicity can be utilized in so many different ways. You can simplify your task lists, for example, just by saying, you know what, I'm not going to do this work because it's not necessary, right? There are so many things in our life that we complexify, so to speak. No, that's not a verb, but we create that level of complexity that's just so unnecessary.
Yeah, I'm really good at that. Adding the extra complex. No, really, it is something that has taken me years to understand and even ask myself: Are I'm making this process more complex? I'm doing this more complex than what it needs to be. Um, it's really simple, and they really, we assume that no, we think about it is going to be simple. Not necessarily. There is people, again, like me, who will tend to overcomplicate it, to put unnecessary steps for things that you can do much faster. So if you are on that group, it is important to be aware that, yeah, I will tend to overcomplicate things. It took me years. Again, I had gadgets galore. Okay, why? Because I have the gadget who can do this thing. Great, except that now that gadget require other set of maintenance. So, I was making my life simpler? No, I was complicating my life with some of those things.
Yeah, and I also tend to think about simplicity in the sense of when we look at all of the various things that could be done or should be done, or would be done, those things all need to be looked at through some lens, and that might be, in the planning phase. For me, I tend to create greater complexity on the planning side than I do in the action steps, and certainly in the reflection phase of any part of my world. So I need to know that I need to simplify the number of steps I do during planning, whereas I'm not particularly concerned about that when it comes to action or reflection. I'm pretty good at doing a simple debriefing. I'm pretty good at implementing in as simple a manner as possible, and so those kinds of protocols are easy for me, but difficult in planning. And so you should know that about yourself so that you're able to actually start to figure out, hey, can I simplify this planning process, or can I simplify this workflow in the action phase? And that really helps you overall in becoming more productive over time. So with that, I think that really covers what I wanted to talk about in terms of simplicity. Was there anything else, Augusto? Otherwise, let's get into our technology headlines this week.
No, let's begin with our technology headlines.
All right, let's do it. What's our first headline this week?
So Facebook is going to launch their own podcast platform, and it's getting there. It's not. It wasn't out today. As of today, as the moment we're recording this show, even that supposedly was going to be out by then, but it is coming. But there is a couple of things that are interesting. The people who are reading all the term of services, that thing that most people don't read and click accept, are saying
I do. I read them.
That you do. Yes, I know you do. And that's the reason when these things come, you are the first one I ask. Where are we in this? But apparently Facebook put on there that the company will have the rights to make derivative works from the content that you upload in there. So
well, again, so people should recognize this. You have agreed to that terms of service for everything that you posted on Facebook ever.
Correct.
Correct. Your profile photographs, how they do those ads and they have pictures of people. Yeah, that's because of your terms of service. They pulled them from real people. They have basically said anything you post on Facebook they can use for promotional purposes and other derivative works. And I'm pretty sure that the podcast fits right well within that space. They also talked about this notion of creating clips so that you're able to source smaller portions. I've talked about this in the past on my other podcast about the notion of YouTube doing this. YouTube now has a feature called clips. They're not actually separate videos. videos. They are just time signatures that show up in their own playlist that allow you to do this. I think Facebook is doing something very similar to that, where you're capable of sourcing these pieces. I don't know if they're going to be separate files. That will be interesting to see whether or not they'll be separate files or whether they're actually going to just basically play that portion of the audio on the platform. This will not be a replication of your podcast. You are going to be sourcing from your podcast feed so that people can actually listen to it there. So if you spend time on Facebook, say if you're a workplace by Facebook user, hopefully this comes to that interface as well, and that becomes more productive for you because you're in that space. But otherwise, I don't listen to podcasts on Facebook, and I probably won't ever. So
yeah, I probably will not listen to podcasts on Facebook, but again, it is there. It is, depending what your business is. If your marketing strategy includes Facebook and you have a podcast, hey, understanding what you're doing there and all this, it's going to be good for people.
All right, on to our next story.
Amazon Store, it's working into the small business program. Apple reduced for small developers 1 million and below their percentage to 15%. Google follows suit with that, and now Amazon is coming not to 15 but to 20%, but is saying that you can get AWS credits up to 10%. So that will technically make it that your Amazon Store thing, it's really 10% with the credits you will get if you use their own server. So it's a spin out of this, but it's interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, they want to encourage people to use AWS, and this is a way to pull from some folks from Azure, from Google Cloud, in that way. So it makes sense.
And it's been interesting because at least for what I see, on the day-to-day work, there is more and more companies that we're looking to Google and we're using AWS now pull into Azure. So it's getting interesting how much pull Microsoft and how much attention Microsoft has been getting out of Azure.
All right, onward to our next story this week.
Microsoft new Office UI, it's now available for testers. And it looks clean. The images, at least, I did not download it. But it looks clean, it looks round, it actually looks pretty, I'm going to say.
Yeah, so they announced a wide sweeping set of changes to the Office product, and they are just putting in those first refinements, I would call them. A little bit rounding of the areas. The ribbon is still there. The ribbon will go away and will become kind of a command center, so to speak, that can float and be moved about. And so those who want to see the new version, the new changes that are coming now, but most likely with the release of Windows 11, you can go and join the Office Insider group, and that will give you access to those betas by turning on the beta channel. But for the most part, I'm happy to look at it. Have no interest in testing these things beforehand. I don't think that it's necessary. So we'll see what happens. But
yeah, I'm on the same boat. I'm happy I see the images. I have, even if they say, oh, you can download it and play with it, I have zero interest into this. But our next story, Google Home gets redesigned. Wi-Fi device tab, and they have been making a bunch of changes. When this article was pulled out initially, they were not all the changes were rolled out by July 5th. The rest of the changes now were active on the app, so the app were showing really everything. So, but it's really interesting. Again, if you have the Google Home, then the app, at least on the iOS, now looks completely different.
Right. So this comes into play because the Google Wi-Fi app was deprecated, and they have now put all of the Wi-Fi components finally into Google Home. So when you click on Wi-Fi, you can see your Google Wi-Fi devices, and you can manage them completely now that you couldn't before, including, I know in the article it noted that the test device speed function was yet not available, but it is across all of my devices. So I am able to go in, you click on how many, you know, the number of devices you have, and then you click on your device, and then from the drop down menu you can actually check your device feed. So it looks like all of the features are now available.
Yeah,
in
I think what happened was the iPad, the application came out and the not.
Uh-oh, looks like we lost Augusto. He'll be back shortly. We'll continue on with our stories this week. Next up in the lineup is an article on Medium. This is from the Echo Chat folks, and they were talking about the best collaboration tools for business, and they listed 5 of them. Of course, one of them being their own app, the Echo messaging app for Teams. But they listed a couple of good apps that I think, you know, we all know about and have used for a long time, or at least know exist. So they talked about Asana, Zoom, Google Docs, Slack, and then Echo. What I thought was actually really interesting is that below that article had another article about voice messaging apps. And I thought this was really interesting because while, of course, Echo was one of those apps that they listed, the other apps that they actually talked about were kind of, you know, in the same kind of genre of you know, Skype and blah blah blah. But then I kept thinking there are actually a whole series of applications like this, from Voxer to other apps in that ecosystem that allow you to have, if you want to call it, like asynchronous meetings in a way, but basically they allow you to go in and have conversations with other folks in this way. So they listed Voxer, Marco Polo. I'm not particularly, going back to Augusto's point earlier, I'm not particularly a fan of the Voxer terms of service. So so I actually have never installed Voxer. A colleague of mine asked me to use Voxer, and I basically said no because I was not particularly pleased with the terms of service and the way in which they handled privacy and data security. So just be mindful of that. I've not played with Marco Polo, but I know people who have. There are all of these kinds of apps that allow you to interact and engage in that way. And know that also Telegram, for example, you could use Telegram in that same way. The goal, though, is to say, hey, Augusto, you and I are going to have a meeting asynchronously about topic X. Well, what we're going to do is over the next 3 days, everybody who's going to be in the meeting is going to go through the agenda and say their piece about each of those agenda items. You record your audio, and then they record back. And so you get this chain of conversation that's happening asynchronously. And then there's a cutoff point, right? Like 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Saving Time on Friday, the meeting basically closes. And then all the decisions that are made are then in that space. I think that could be a really useful, I haven't tried it yet, but I feel like that could be a really useful form of asynchronous meeting where you have these agendas that are designed around, whether it's audio and chat or text, it doesn't matter, audio, video, chat, and text. I think those things can be bundled together, but you don't have to set a meeting for some concentrated period of time. I think there can be some really interesting things there. Anyway, let's go on to our last story in the technology listing, Augusto, for Android. What is going on there? So it's
okay, we haven't. You need to read it because my technology crashed in here.
No worries, no worries. So that everybody's aware, Android has brought a number of new features to the system. So at I/O and actually even prior to that, Google had been announcing several new features to be launching on the Android platform, and now they're just announcing that some of these things have come about. Some of them are really, really useful. So first and foremost, they have the Android Earthquake alert system is now rolled out globally, or it should be rolled out globally by now. And in essence, you will get a notification when when the Android Earthquake alerts system recognizes that there is an earthquake coming, and so it's just going to basically push a notification just the same way you get a notification when there is a thunderstorm alert or an Amber alert or those kinds of alerts that happen on your system. It's just basically going to do that. Google Messages got the ability for you to star messages. So say you frequently communicate with your a friend, family member, spouse, partner, and in it they shared some piece of information that was really important. You can now star that information, and then it basically tags it with that star so that you can find it later. Very similar to Gmail, where you can star things and then find it for a later purpose. They talked about finding more emoji within the emoji kitchen. That's that secondary bar that when you pull up your emojis in Gboard, which is the keyboard application both for iOS and Android. When you pull up that Google-focused keyboard, Gboard, you now have called the Emoji Kitchen. It's that banner that are the bigger emojis, which are stickers that you can push into your chat. So really nice that it is faster and more rich. They then talked about the Google Assistant getting more shortcuts. And so you can ask, hey, Big G, shortcuts, and it will then go ahead and tell you what you can do now. You can actually have deeper, richer experiences within some of your applications by voice. They talked about improved password input and gaze detection on voice access for those with, motor disabilities. And finally, the customization with Android Auto is now here, and I actually experienced this yesterday while driving. You open up the Google Maps application, and right below your Google Maps, you now see what the active secondary application is that's being utilized with a microphone. You click the microphone, and then you can say, "Hey, Big G, do X or Y," and it goes ahead and starts the process for you, playing music, sending messages, playing podcasts. All of those things are there in that kind of lower tray. It seems to take up a bit of space. I wasn't particularly glad about that, but you can actually click the little tray and it'll drop down and take up less space at the bottom. So nice new set of features that Google has provided to us with this Android update. And so all good there. And with that, we have reached the end of our first half of news. We're going to hear a word from our sponsor, Co-working Space by Personal Productivity Club. And when we get back, we will continue with our productivity articles, our story of the week, our new tools of the week, and our segment Priority Report. See you after the break.
While working in person may be normal for you, it's unlikely your coworkers are as interested in being productive as you are. Or working remotely or from home can be isolating, and there's something powerful about being with productive people, even virtually, that helps you be more engaged. If a flavor of these sounds familiar, Co-working Space by Personal Productivity Club is for you. Co-working Space is a virtual work community designed to help members be more effective and efficient in their work and personal lives. At its core, we provide goal tracking and host focused action sessions throughout the week for accountability and camaraderie. Visit anythingbutidle.com/coworking to learn more. Co-working Space lives inside Personal Productivity Club, a digital community for personal productivity enthusiasts, so you can find people who use methods and tools you do too. Again, head over to anythingbutidle.com/coworking to see how Co-working Space can help you be more productive. And now, back to our show.
Welcome back, everybody, to Anything But Idle. I'm Ray Sidney Smith, joined with Augusto Pinaud for our second half of Anything But Idle. And so, Augusto, what is our first productivity article in the lineup?
So the first article is from 2-Minute Madness, and it's called The Checklist Method, How to Supercharge Your Life. And the article talk about, how to use acronym really to make your brain remembering what are the things you need to do. So what they talk about is the example they give is a basketball acronym. They give an example with Michael Jordan, and they talk the beef. But how you can use this acronym as checklist for your routines. And in my experience, the acronym may not work, but the checklist, it works incredibly well for me. So I know when I wake up, what are the 10 things that are going to happen, and they tend to happen mostly on that order, Monday to Sunday. And that gives me a lot of bandwidth. My shirts tend to match pants, doesn't matter the shirt I pick, but it's part of the process. It's part of trying to make sure that you are not making every time a new decision, that you can think about them ahead of time and you can just execute the plan as they happen. This checklist system, what it's just going to give you is a way to remember them easy using this acronym.
Yeah, so I actually have never actually seen of all after all this time. This is the first time I'm actually seeing. Like I'm very used to mnemonics. I've heard the use of mnemonics and the use of acronyms in all kinds of other ways for more productive output. But this is the first time I actually saw someone say, "Well, why don't you create a routine and then create an acronym for that routine and then utilize the acronym for remembering the routine?" That was kind of the genius in the simplicity, a la our topic today, that I thought was actually really novel here. And so, if you want to do a series of things and you want to be able to remember that series of things on call, being able to do them, on demand, I think that's a really interesting way to do it. And so, I just use a digital tool to externalize that for me. I don't really think about it staying in my head, but if you are in a place like, you want to be able to remember survival techniques, or you want to be able to do things that are really important and you're not going to be able to depend upon your technology always, that's a really good way to think about it. So, okay, on to our next article.
Samar Gotan talks about the paradox of motivation, and it's bringing flow, the research by
Dr. Csikszentmihalyi High.
Thank you very much. And someday I will be able to pronounce his name, or never. And one of the things that he's talking about is the motivation when you do work versus you do leisure, and why this motivation seems to be different. And the answer he gives is, well, at work you get into flow, that at leisure you don't. I don't know if I necessarily agree on that, or maybe that my leisure is really close to what I do for work, but
yeah, I think you're an outlier. and I think that's the case, right? Most of us who are in the productivity space are people who are inclined toward action, and people who spend their leisure time vegetating, right, turning off. They end up being less happy. They actually end up being feeling mundane and like things aren't really organized, and that's actually competing with them. So they actually get higher success and feelings of fulfillment at work, except that they feel only motivated to go to work for the paycheck. And then they come home and they actually don't feel that same level of organization and order, structure to their world. And so it ends up being that they just like loaf. And the only times they actually do the things that they need to do are when they do laundry, go grocery shopping, and so on and so forth. Those are done in sporadic fashion. And of course, that doesn't provide the level of order and structure for them to be able to enjoy themselves. And so the article author talks about the idea that if you provide just a little bit of structure, right? Having hobbies, having a schedule for your weekend, just like you have a schedule for your week. All of these things actually beget greater fulfillment in your personal leisure time. And, it's really sad in my perspective, because we have and have had, at least in the United States, a strong long-term push toward liberal arts educations. And liberalism, right? Free living has been and you've heard me talk about this before, I know, but it makes so much sense to understand this on a fundamental level. We've been pushed to understand what it's like to live a free life, a liberal life. And yet we go through these liberal education processes, liberal arts education process, and we don't learn productivity. We don't learn to actually utilize that time to actually feel fulfilled. And so it makes me sad for people who do that. They get home from work and they don't actually engage in what I call rejuvenative activities, those activities that actually are structured and actually do something that expends energy, but ultimately makes you feel better, makes you actually happier in life. If we want to use such a broad term, I like to say contented or fulfilled, much more, structured terms for those things. But I just really feel like we need to think about that. And this article really pointed that out for me, and I enjoyed it for that reason. All right. On from the paradox of motivation to the 4-day work week. What's going on?
Kickstarter is motivating his people to work 4 days a week. And I think that's brilliant, actually, that we are finally, for many years we have said we got all these benefits from technology just to work more. And now we're finally catching up to the point, okay, maybe we can go into this 4-day week and work 4 days a week and be more effective and keep the effectiveness. And it is really interesting to see companies starting to embrace that. And hopefully that will bring change for
Whole,
many
whole countries. I
organizations.
mean, Spain went out there and tested a 4-day work week and saw productivity increases. Microsoft Japan did a 4-day work week and saw a 40% increase. I think it was something like that, some huge jump in productivity output. We've seen Unilever do it. We've seen a number of other companies, Buffer, the social media scheduling dashboard tool. We've seen a lot of companies try this. And of course, we know that we are capable of doing so much more in less time than we currently do. Wages have been stagnating especially in this country, but globally, we've seen wage stagnation. And why not give back? Again, going back to this, like, the supposed benefits of liberalism, give people back their time and they'll be happier and therefore they'll be more productive. So if we actually do this, it's not that people are going to do nothing with that free time. That it's their choice, right? That's a concept of free society. But you would hope that they would actually do things that are interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary, where they would actually have hobbies, they would have extracurricular activities, and those ideas that they spur and have, you go rock climbing and you're like, hey, you know what? I work for this industrial manufacturing company. And when I'm rock climbing, we do this with these carabiners in this particular way. I wonder if we actually did those with our machines, whether that would actually innovate in our factories. And voila, what someone was doing in their free time ultimately begets millions and potentially billions of dollars of innovation in their work time. We forget the value of being able to give people free time. And I think that, the invention of the 8-hour day and the 5-day work week was, revolutionary, or if not evolutionary at its least. Now we are at that place where we can go to a 4-day work week, not even diminish productivity, and probably increase it across the board. And that leads us, of course, then to the reduction of the 8-hour workday. And that brings us to our next article, Augusto.
So the next article is exactly that, is Seattle Times talking about clinging into the 8-hour workday, where research suggests that 5 hours is better. And as I was reading the article, it was really interesting because my day is longer than 8 hours and it's fine. But my day also was designed to spend time with my kids on the afternoon. So when I look at that 5 hour, really, it is a block, probably 4 to 5 hours. Then it has a massive chunk of relax. And then you go to another big chunk of 3 or 4 hours. And that works really well for me. With this pandemic, that, the barriers of that has come in closer and closer and closer. Also, productivity has come in decline because I don't have, as you were saying, that time of decompress, of disconnect, or do more reading, more playing with the kids and this thing. So the article was as I was looking at my calendar and the current projects, I was like, I need to mark and get this off again and walk away from the office and get back again to splitting my day into big chunks of less than 8 hours.
Yeah, I think there are lots of opportunities for companies to test different levels of time. I know that some people talked about a 6-hour workday. Many folks are advocating for different splitting of time in terms of the workday. If we have more hours in some days, then we can take off hours on other days. It's kind of like the way in which I've seen several governments do it, which kind of misses the point, right? If you make people work 10-hour days, 4 days out of the week, then they think that they can get rid of that 5th day because they've still worked the same number of hours. But in reality, we're really not increasing productivity. There is a form of eustress, positive stress, which is time pressure that can happen for folks if they concentrate their work in these periods of time. And so we not just get the same amount done, we actually get more done when we are putting ourselves in this period of time. And there's always going to be positions and people who work beyond those hours. And so that's fine. But the reality is that for the vast majority of people, they spend a lot of wasted time. You get in the office in the morning, there's coffee clutching, water cooler talk, there's all of this personalizing and personal time that gets kicked into the workday just to make the day filled. And even with economic downturns where those tend to actually go away, in the case of the pandemic, all of that went out the window and people just started working more and more hours because they were, working from the same place that they were living, and that became unhealthy. So we need to be able to kind of decouple those things and really work hard to create greater and better productivity that's healthy for humans. We are still human. We are not machines. We're humans, and humans are actually productive in counterintuitive ways. And so we need to be able to utilize our creative and innovative capacities. And that is not a checking the boxes of time. That is giving and setting people up fundamentally for success. And success doesn't mean but in chair time. And so we need to keep getting ourselves around that we should be worried about impact on output versus time in chair. So out of the way, on to our next story.
Our next story is from Friday.app and is 10 tried and tested tips for a super productive way. And it was a good reminder for a super productive week. It was a good reminder. Focus on a single task. Yeah. If you are still multitasking, there are problems. Okay. There are things you can do. You can do music but most of the multitasking is problematic. Optimize how you work and learning to say no. And I have write about that, multiple times. Begin your day with movement. What are you going to do? What are your set of smaller goals? It was a really complete list. Complete is better than perfect. As I said with the writing, publish better than perfect.
I'll just point out one little point here with beginning with movement. I have now started my workday in the standing desk position for my desk. And I have to admit, I am way more productive by starting my day standing than when I start my day sitting. And just that one modification has all of these downstream effects that have been really, really positive. So starting with movement doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go walk or run or do exercise. There is just the point of me standing has a different effect on my overall productivity throughout the day, which has been really powerful. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, for me, it was a change. Every 30 minutes, the watch will vibrate or sound. I have shared this on the show, and then I stand up and stretch. That's all that I do. It takes 2 minutes or less, and I just go stand up, and that has bring benefit from eliminate the back pain, from energy, for so many benefits having that consistent movement. So block distractions, automate repetitive tasks, create a list that what you are going to do in the workday, and take frequent short breaks. And I will say to that list on the workday, make them as short as you possibly can. One of the common mistakes I've seen is this long list, and then you at the end of the day mark 3-5 things and feel, you see, I make no progress. I still have 100 things. Instead, when you mark 2 and you get them done and you add another one, you are always getting that feeling of success that is going to allow you to get to the next task.
Absolutely. Onward.
The last one, and I thought this article was relevant to our sponsor, Co-working Space, is the 5 stages of working with accountability partners. And what are the benefits of that? If you are hearing the show and you don't know what it is, Personal Productivity Club has the co-working space. You can go there. People will go into the camera and work. Okay, there is no much that put the goal in the chat, what you are trying to accomplish, and everybody's there working, doing their business. But it is really incredible, the levels of motivation that you get out of that simple sharing that screen there with everybody.
Absolutely. I think that there are all kinds of ways in which we can establish accountability. And if anybody has heard me talk before, I think about accountability in terms of 4 levels, one-to-one, group, that is, it starts off with self-accountability. You can be accountable to yourself, which is kind of 0. 1 is one-to-one accountability. Then we go to group accountability, and then public accountability, where we make statements that we're going to do things in public forums like Twitter or Facebook to everybody that we know. These levels of accountability on the group accountability level that you're talking about in terms of co-working space is a structured program, but you can also create accountability partners just one-to-one with family and friends about all kinds of things. Gym Buddy is a form of accountability partner. Having someone who is going to help you with your nutrition, having a nutritionist or a registered dietitian who works with you to create a meal plan, that is a form of accountability. It's a paid professional relationship, but it is an accountability partner. And so we have all kinds of ways in which we establish accountability, and it works. We know it works. And so we should always embrace accountability where it's possible and think of it from the productive outputs. This person who's writing the article talked about some of the travails that come into play when you do establish an accountability partnership. And what we all need to do is to say, okay, how do we partner with ourselves first? That's zero, right? Before we get to one, we need to think zero. How do we keep ourselves accountable and really work to do that? How do we also then, in a one-to-one relationship, whether that be a collegial friendly accountability program or a paid relationship with a coach or a trainer or somebody else like that, and then in a group accountability space like co-working space where you have many people are joining, you're in essence really being accountable to yourself, but only through the vehicle of having other people see you do that work, which is a weird psychological structure, but it works and it's really fascinating. And then, of course, I always say, public accountability is great in small bits. It really doesn't provide you with a lot of great benefit in the long term, because if you say, hey, I'm going to go run a marathon, and that's great, you can go do that and maybe you will, but if you don't, there's actually high risk, and you feel that failure that much more strongly, and that will sometimes compete with your ability to then feel a sense of efficacy, self-efficacy, in the future. So use public accountability very, very sparsely, studiously for those purposes. Alrighty, that takes us through our stories this week, at least our main stories this week. And that brings us, of course, along to our segment this week, which is by Penny Zenker. She's a focusologist, international speaker, a business strategy coach, and best-selling author. And she's in our rotations of special segments inside of Anything But Idle. And her segment is called Priority Report. And here today, she's going to be talking to us about the sunk cost. And so with that, take it away, Penny.
Welcome to today's Priority Report. My name is Penny Zenker, and today I want to talk about the sunk cost effect and how it can be sabotaging your decision-making. So the way that you can get more effective in your decision-making is to be aware of this sunk cost effect. So what is a sunk cost, first of all? Well, a sunk cost is any time, money, energy, and investment that was made in the past that's no longer recoverable. That's a sunk cost. And the sunk cost effect is the bias that investment in the past is creating so that we actually continue to invest past the point that it provides a cost benefit. Because when our emotions go up, our intellect goes down. And so we have this emotional connection that tells us, but look, we've spent so much time, money, and energy on this already. We should keep going. So I want you to be aware of what the sunk cost is and what's the criteria that you're defining for success from this point forward. So if you have a new product that you're bringing to market, this was the case for me. I was in software development. We would develop a beta, we would have it tested, and based on the feedback that we got, we would need to determine whether this product would be continued to be invested in and brought to market. If we took into account the sunk cost and allowed that to influence our decision, then we might make poor decisions and invest in areas that were not good decisions to make for our future because we were taking that into account. So we would have to shut that down and say, okay, this is already being invested and we can get other benefits from it. But the decision making about bringing this to market, we had to look at the economic factors. We had to look at, what the users were telling us in terms of usability, and also in terms of the need of the marketplace and so forth. So you want to determine what are the success factors and make sure that you are not coming victim to that sunk cost effect. My name is Penny Zenker, and that's today's Priority Report.
All right. Thank you, Penny Zenker from Penny Zenker's. She put her URL on the screen, but I'll put that in the show notes for everybody so that you have that. But it's pennysKeynote.com, and so you guys can go check her out there. And so onward with our new tools this week. So each week, Augusto and I come across many personal productivity tools and services, and in our scouring the web for productivity and technology news articles and so on and so forth. So in new tools of the week, we try to bring you tools that we think you might like. And so this week we have 2 tools, and I will start off. Actually, we have 3 tools because I'm going to cheat and talk about 2. But the first tool is a tool called Reclaim.ai. And this is actually the one that I've been testing out myself. And so Reclaim is a smart time blocking calendaring tool, and it allows you to take your work and represent them in the calendar, and then populate your calendar in these time blocks. But they're coming from your existing task lists, so that you're not actually keeping them in more than one place. In essence, you're not replicating them in that sense. So this integrates with Google Calendar, and so you're capable of going ahead and doing this. But it does a whole bunch of things. You can synchronize your calendars so that you can have catch up time and put all kinds of things into the calendar. You can do meeting buffer time. You can see stats. You can integrate with Slack and all kinds of other fun things. I've actually enjoyed the concept of it. It's got a learning curve. It's a little bit of a high learning curve, from my perspective, kind of getting into it. And so for me, I know how these tools work, but I think for the average person just jumping into it, there is a bit of a learning curve. So just be mindful of that. And but otherwise, it's actually really, really interesting to watch yourself start to quote unquote reclaim time here and identify focus time for yourself in all of the work that you need to get done throughout the week. So something to certainly consider. It's currently a free tool. You can use it for free through 2021 to kind of see and test it out. And then, of course, they have one of their competitors. There are many others in this market, but Clockwise is the other one. And one of the links in the show notes will be a comparison between these 2 done by Reclaim. So understand that it's biased because it was written by one of the tools, writers. But the idea here is that Clockwise does something very similar, but it actually looks at it from a little bit different of a paradigm, looking for what they call focus time and trying to establish focus time for you. I will note that both of these tools are Google Calendar focused. So they connect to Google Calendar. And I don't believe either currently connects to Microsoft 365 or Apple or anything else like that. So both of these work with Google personal as well, Google Consumer workplace accounts, and Google Business workplace accounts. So if you were using Google Workspace for consumers or Google Workspace for business, you'll be able to connect your calendars from that system, and it'll work just fine. But they're obviously all going to be working on bringing greater integration just at its baseline from the Microsoft 365 space, because Google Calendar is the dominant, but then we have Microsoft 365 and others that are in the marketplace as well. All right, Augusto, what's your tool this week?
My is FE File Explorer, and they have a paid version and a free version, and there is a comparison, but allows you organize the files, allows you to connect. I get sometimes people who things to Dropbox, and then they need to go to Google Drive, or they need to go to iCloud, or they need to go to an NAS on the server, okay, or a directory. And with the iPad, I live on the iPad. I get it. If you're on a PC, you're on a Mac. There's ways to do this. If you're on an iPhone, you are on an iPad. It's a little bit more challenging. So this allows me to transfer, to copy, to save. You save the drives, you save the disk. Even go if there is somebody near who have that, I can transfer files. I can edit documents. I can play music in there or videos if I want to. It is the application that I wish the Files app from Apple will do. And it allows you to really copy from one place to the other, really make for this network and data and transfer from services from Dropbox to iCloud to Google to even a pen drive, really something really, really simple. And they are on iOS, they are on the Google Play, they are on the Mac Store. So it is a really fantastic application.
Fantastic. All right. So that brings us along to today's story of the week. So our featured story this week is that Google Drive for desktop has gotten some upgrades. What are some of those upgrades, Augusto?
So Google Drive finally will allow you to do multi-account switching. That it is interesting when we talk about the article. I use the Mac so little that I don't think about the things, and on the iPad you can do the multi-switching relatively easy. So when it came and I read that, I said multi-use. What do you mean? So I pulled the Mac out of the bag, log in and say, oh yeah, this is painful. Let's update it right away. You will also be able to do pictures, but store your files. So you will now be able to work much better on the iPad, on the iPad. Sorry, on Google Drive.
Yeah, so Google Drive for desktop, just so folks are clear on this, Google Drive for desktop, you have the backup and sync from Google application. That Google Drive for desktop application pretty much is the same thing. And now you can check a box. It'll add a feature, which is allowing you to upload photos to Google Photos to the platform. So now you have the seamless synchronization up to the platform, and it gives you the ability. You could have multiple accounts, but you really couldn't get between the accounts very easily. Now you can actually switch between those accounts seamlessly, and that's obviously just good all around. I think that what we're seeing here is that all of the various platforms are starting to just kind of have the same features. We're kind of, you talk about this, with Art Gelwick's, in the sense of, most of the platforms having pretty strong feature parity in terms of the strongest core features. And now we're seeing this really extend beyond that and bringing those features from cloud services to the desktop. And I think it makes a lot of sense, both desktop and mobile. I think we should really across the board have these kinds of strong features. And since Google, we used to have a Google Photos app. I don't know if everybody remembers. We had a Google Photos app, and you could install that Google Photos app. And in those early days, and Picasa, it was Picasa, and then after that. But with Picasa, you had this really rich photo management technology that you could utilize. They got rid of that in deference to kind of bundling Picasa into Google Photos proper. And we've gone through all of these machinations, and now we're just like kind of full circle back. We're going back to getting some of those features, not all of them. And I hope that over time, because Google saw the advent of mobile becoming the primary place where photos were going to be edited, so to speak, I think they probably gave up on the idea of desktop photo editing and to a great extent. But photo management is still really important on the desktop. And so I'm hopeful that they will continue this step forward in bringing more Google Photos technologies to it, especially now that they have bundled, they got rid of the free Google Photos component, right? So now, except if you're still utilizing one of the supported Pixel line of phones, but that means that they now have revenues that support the ability for them to bring new features to Google Photos. And I think that's the really important part here, because I want Google Photos to do better. I pay Google both on my business side and on my personal side to manage my photos. I want them to do more for me. And so now that more people are paying, that means that they now have a pool of money to use to iterate in this sense. And so I hope that they get kind of Apple iCloud, Apple Photos type services and capabilities and go beyond that even. I want a full-fledged application that I can utilize. I want to do those kinds of things with Google Photos. And now they actually have the underlying revenue to be able to drive that. Any final thoughts about our story this week?
Yeah, I think it's exciting that they are finally coming to in the desktop. Again, I'm not a desktop guy, but the difference between Google Drive and Dropbox is abysmal on the desktop. When I pull the Mac, the difference between those two is abysmal. So I'm hoping that this release will bring them a lot closer.
Absolutely. And with that, Augusto, we have covered the productivity and technology news of the week.
We have survived with the beautiful background and backdrop that I have. This is a picture, people.
Well, you did the show mobily, and it worked just fine. We had minor hiccups, so I think it all worked out well. Thank you so much for putting together the show each week.
Always my pleasure.
All right, gentlemen. All right, audience. We are done with the show, but if we missed a story, feel free to head over to our contact page at anythingbutidle.com. You can tweet or DM us also on Twitter at anything but idle. So if we missed something, you can go ahead and let us know about that. But just so that you're aware, we do have in our show notes on anythingbutidle.com/069, which is the episode number. So you can find all of our episodes by going to the episode number. So anythingbutidle.com/069, that'll take you to our show notes. That actually includes links to not only the stories we covered, but stories we couldn't cover. We have an extra or an other stories section in the show notes. So check out those other stories. They're just the ones that we couldn't cover in the show's time frame. But that also includes links to our new tools of the week. It includes a link to the priority report with Penny Zenker. So we have that information in there if you want to find Penny. And we also have the transcripts. So we have transcripts in both a readable format. Just click on the read more link. It'll expand it and you'll be able to read. You can also click on the download link below that. You click on that link, it'll download a PDF version for you to be able to download and take offline as well. If this is your first time watching the live stream, feel free to subscribe so that you'll get notified when we go live weekly. If you're listening to the podcast after the fact, feel free to follow the podcast or subscribe to the podcast as it's called. Go to anythingbutidle.com if you need instructions for that. Click on the follow subscribe link that's at the top of the screen, and you'll get instructions on how to follow or download new episodes when they come out each week. And so if you've enjoyed watching or listening, feel free to give us a thumbs up on YouTube, give us a rating in your favorite podcast app, whatever you're doing. Those reviews and indications help us increase our personal productivity community. And so thank you for doing that. And with that, we'll see you all next time on Anything But Idle. Here's to your productive life.